So not make him wait any longer. Jeff Paterson waiting in the wings, ready to join us. And Jeff is brought to you by Greta, the home of our electric watch parties. Greta is our spot to chill pregame, postgame, and all through the offseason as well. Just 10 minutes away by walking, of course, from Rogers Arena. Check out Greta Bar YVR today. We're going to have another watch party. It's getting announced soon, folks. We're going to have a watch party. It's going to be a lot of fun. But one event we're going to have, and we'll talk about it with Jeff as well later on, is the event. Actually, let's talk about it right now. Jeff, we've already told people about it. Saturday, April 20th at the Hollywood Theater in Kitsilano. Special tribute to our friend Jason Botchford. And of course, talking about the Canucks playoffs as well. It's going to be a fun event, and you're going to be a big part of that event as well.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And, Botch obviously didn't get a chance to cover a lot of playoff hockey, as those of us that have been on the beat for a while. And so his final season covering this team was 2018-19, and the draft that was held here in Vancouver, and Bud Colson's draft year, but certainly wasn't any playoff hockey for the Vancouver Canucks. And then in the bubble, unfortunately, Jason wasn't with us. And so, yes, I think it's trying to be a celebration of the return of playoff hockey while we honor Jason's legacy. So there'll be lots of Botch stories, some that have probably been told a bunch of times, maybe some new ones that have been unearthed along the way. But all with an eye to playoff hockey, whatever that looks like for the Vancouver Canucks, as long as it's going to last. We'll see. Again, so many balls in the air about where they're going to finish and where other teams are going to finish when the dust settles. So still too soon to try. I know you guys were trying to pick playoff opponents the other day, but sort of a fruitless mission there. But the night at the Commodore back in 2019 was an amazing night. I don't know that this is going to be a replication of that. I think there'll be some similarities, but yeah, I mean, the bottom line is the Canucks are returning to the playoffs. They haven't quite clinched their spot yet, but they're going to. And unfortunately, we won't have Botch around to cover it and document it, but he'll be there in spirit. And so, yeah, if people are looking for a little pre-playoff fun, good afternoon on the 20th of April. Make plans to come out and join us at the Hollywood.
Gonna be a good time. Gonna be a great time. Okay, Jeff, final month of the season here. Playoffs start on April 20th. Like, that's when the Stanley Cup playoffs start here. Biggest question facing the Canucks. I wrote it for Canucks Army today. I wrote down 5. Tried to pick 5. What's the biggest question facing this team? I'll tell you mine. Mine's the power play. Mine is unequivocally the power play. But what do you think is the biggest question facing this team down the final month of the season and heading into the playoffs?
Well, let the record show that I read your piece. So I don't want to sound like I'm stealing, but you had so many good options there. I think for me, it's just best players. And are they going to be up to the challenge? And that dovetails into the power play, certainly. But all we have to go on is the bubble, which was the most unique experience that anybody is ever going to experience at that level in the National Hockey League. Now, guys like Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes in their first look at playoff hockey came through with flying colors. And we all know that they pushed Vegas in that second round. It was funny the other day talking to Brock Besser and just asking him if he was starting to view everything through a playoff prism. And quite frankly, I was shocked to hear his answer where he said, I haven't played in the playoffs technically. And he dropped the technically in there. But I thought, isn't that interesting? Like, that's how he views that bubble experience. Like, there was intensity. Okay, maybe the St. Louis Blues as the defending champs didn't have the intensity, but those Vegas games, you had to grind for every inch available. I think the hockey on the ice, once the puck dropped, it replicated some degree of playoff hockey, but nobody in the stands. You don't have to go into hostile environments. Certainly you didn't have to travel. And so, yes, this wasn't the true test of playoff hockey. So guys like Besser and Demko and Pettersson and Hughes, they are going to have to learn on the fly. And I guess for me, the question is, will they be up to the challenge? And for me, playoff hockey is all about matchups, right? Like, and again, you don't know who they're going to draw, but it's about matchups and then it's about adjustments. Like the team that loses that opener, it's on them to make the necessary adjustments so that they don't fall down 2-0. And then if you're the team that gets up, if the other team comes back, then it's on you to, figure out with a couple of games under your belt now, what's worked for you, what hasn't. And so I love the chess match between the coaches. I love the fact like the, road team doesn't have we always talk about, home team last change in the regular season. Sure. It means a lot when you can dictate the matchups. And if you can get a particular checking line out against the other team's top players, can the Canucks best players fight through that? Now, JT Miller's motor is always running. I don't have much doubt that JT Miller is going to show up and compete and be able to produce. Some of these other guys, it is a different animal. And I'm not saying that they won't. And I use the bubble experience as proof that they have been able to elevate. But I think we all know, I mean, the market's on fire right now about Elias Pettersson and kind of how quiet he is. And so it's on him to silence people, to make them eat their words. And I'm not a guy that wants to bet against EP40, but I would like to see some signs of life here over these final 14 games so that this isn't the tone and the conversation that's carrying on as they get to games 81 and 82 and ultimately to the first game of the playoffs. So I want to see some signs of life from him. You guys were just talking about the change, and we'll see if Garland and Höglander can get in and be buzzsaws and, hound pucks for him and create some space and all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, it's on EP40, though. I just think he's got to dig in a little bit more. He's been fumbling the pucks. He's been fighting the puck, which we're not used to seeing from him. And I'm looking for a smooth game here one of these nights. And it hasn't happened of late, but every night's a new night. We saw him run the league essentially in mid-January. So it's there. We know what he's capable of, but certainly would like to see some signs of life from him here as early as tonight.
What are your thoughts on the new look, top nine especially? What are you looking for? Are you excited by these combinations? Not particularly enthused? What are your big picture thoughts there?
Yeah, not totally enthused, but again, I sort of get where Rick Tocchet's coming from, that they're a forward short. Like, they missed the opportunity at the trade deadline and their hands were tied a little bit by their own doing to some degree, but this is a team that needed one more scoring winger. And they keep talking about Dakota Joshua, but you heard Rick Tocchet this morning, and I asked, has there been any kind of setback? And he said, no, just being overly cautious. But for people that keep thinking that he's going to be back today or tomorrow, or it's not going to happen. I hope by the end of the homestand, but certainly the 3 games this week, not anticipating seeing Dakota Joshua. So Tocchet doesn't have that luxury of sort of slotting Joshua back and then building around that. I don't know. I mean, I was fascinated yesterday when you kind of broke down Garland and Pettersson and their history. But there's no reason that it can't work, but it hasn't in the past. So I guess I have somewhat lower expectations. And, Höglander's had an incredible season, but he's got a little bit quiet of late as well. And just he and Petey haven't really been able to manufacture anything. That line with Besser and Miller and tonight Suter, I think they'll be fine. But I wrote about this on Sunday. If you look who scored the goals, Besser had the goal the other night. Mikheyev scored for the first time in forever, set up by Miller, and Miller opened the scoring against Colorado. 3 of the last 4 goals have been that line. They can't be a one-line team with a power play that's not going anywhere. So there are some alarm bells going off in my head. No panic button yet, but certainly some alarm bells. And then I agree with you, Harm, on that third line. And it was funny because I asked Elias Lindholm today, I said, how difficult is this for you to try to find your game while constantly having new line mates? And there was this massive pause before he answered. And I was like, you don't even need to answer the question. You just said enough right there. You could see the wheels spinning. I mean, he was kind of trying to come up with a politically correct answer and went with something along the lines of, I know that, that year in Calgary with Gaudreau and Tkachuk, that doesn't happen very often. And I'm a veteran and, I just got to make it work. But there was sort of this sigh and a pause. And I thought that said it all. And it is tough. Yes, he needs to do more, but he really has played with just about everybody in, just over a month. He just continues to get fed new line mates. And now all of a sudden you're asking a guy to find his game with Ilya Mikheyev on one side, who has the 1 goal since Christmas, and Sam Lafferty, whose only goal since the 1-0 win in Buffalo when he scored the only goal back in mid-January, pinballed off about 4 guys in Seattle and eventually bounced off him and in. He hasn't used his stick to put a puck in the net. So that's a big ask for Elias Lindholm right now to try to rediscover the good stuff, playing on the line with Mikheyev and Lafferty. And then you get a fourth line where, Nils Amon apparently is a better option, at least for tonight, than PDG. And they've taken Vasily Podkolzin and lowered him in the lineup. And I think that maybe takes a little bit of pressure off him to produce because he's played 6 games and there hasn't been a bottom line. He's been all right. He hasn't looked out of place. But I think this is more in a fourth line role, maybe an idea of where he would be slotted when Dakota Joshua comes back. And I think you just ask him to try to be more of an energy guy, get in on the forecheck, be physical, and don't worry so much about producing offense on that line with Teddy Bluger and Nils Amon.
Jeff, you just said a lot of names there. So this is
know.
a good time for me to set you up here because Nar, in our YouTube live chat, regular listener and viewer of the show, is asking if we can get a JPAT do something. Who needs to do something here?
Well, I think you go back to the Elias, take your pick. How about both of them? But I think for me, it's Elias Pettersson. I think I need to see, and again, at the end of the night, like it'd be great if you had a 3 or 4 point night and was electric. I don't even need that right now, though. I need to. I keep saying dig in. You heard Rick Tocchet the other night say like there's more for a lot of these guys. He's got to get it. That he's got to unlock it. Was it break the seal? I think was the term he used. And we all know that there's more there for Elias Pettersson. And so that's what I'm looking for. I'm just looking for a dynamic, a playmaker, a guy that's one step ahead of the opponents when he's got the stick, the puck on his stick, making things happen in the offensive zone. Again, if he sets up his line mates and they don't score, you can't control that. But Pettersson can control his actions. And I am a believer that there's a whole lot more there. Like, forget the contract and all that. I'm just looking at the player right now in isolation. And he's the guy. And when he's on, he obviously can carry a team and dominate a hockey game. They're a much better club, obviously, if he's producing. And so he's the guy. And then Lindholm. But again, I just went through the reasons why maybe it's not fair necessarily to have huge expectations on Lindholm. Lindholm's got to keep doing all the defensive stuff, the faceoffs and penalty killing and those types of things, late game situations. But he does have to find a way to contribute even a little bit here, more than he has over the last 13 or 14 games.
Overall, from the team perspective, they've pretty much got a playoff spot locked. The stakes for finishing first in the Western Conference or even the Pacific Division aren't particularly high, given that you could finish first in the conference and still end up playing Vegas in round one. So given that from a team perspective, it doesn't feel like there's a lot on the line. So going down the stretch, what purpose do you think it sort of serves? Are you particularly worried about wins and losses, or is it more that you're kind of looking for these individual trends, whether it's Pettersson, Lindholm, or the power play? What are you kind of looking for down the stretch? What do you actually put stock into?
I think they have got away from the staples that Tocchet talks about. I mean, you look at the 2 goals that Washington scored the other day, bad turnovers by defensemen, and then that compounding of mistakes that when they're on, mistakes are going to happen. It's a fast sport. The other team's trying to force those mistakes. Like, you have to live with mistakes, but I think you have to make sure that you don't compound them. And we saw that certainly the Ovechkin goal. I mean, just the entire team running around in its own zone. So I want to see them get back to their staples. I want to see them try to eliminate some of those mistakes. And when the mistakes happen, have somebody there to cover up for a buddy. And whether it's the guts of the ice as Tocchet talks about, like, he has made it abundantly clear what this team has to do to be successful. And for much of the season they have, but for the last couple of games, whatever. But I mean, you were out on that road trip. I mean, the game in Vegas, the game in, they came back against Winnipeg, even the game in Los Angeles. So it took them a while, but once they found their footing in that game, they were on, and they gave up, a goal against LA, a goal in Vegas, and none against Winnipeg. So they're not that far removed from a really successful run, but just the fact that Colorado and Washington, at the first sign of adversity, there was a real sag. And look, they're going to trail in the playoffs. Like, they're not going to get the lead and always be in front. And so I want to see them handle adversity a little bit better. I want to see them stick to their staples. And then ultimately, yeah, I mean, I'd like to see the power play get going. Tocchet was talking about that earlier today, that he thinks that they're generating enough looks that it's basically just on the individual players now to finish. And Pettersson had that chance in the one power play they had against Washington the other night, and he didn't convert, but a lot of nights he would score on that opportunity. I think they can be a little bit sharper. It looked like Lindholm at practice yesterday is going to get back onto that first unit. So, to me, that's loading up at least as much as the Canucks can do with their offensive players, and we'll see what the power play looks like here. But you're right, wins and losses individually, not of the utmost importance right now if it's all about getting into the rhythm and finding their game again over the final 14. But I will say this, Arn, I think it would be massively disappointing to get this far into the season and then have the Oilers beat you at the wire. Like, I just think that first place in the division, home ice in the first round, but home ice in the second round. If you get through, I'm not too worried about the conference. If they get to the third round of the playoffs, this has been a massively successful season for a team that really didn't have any kind of expectations of going to the conference final. But if you do have designs on winning a round, then I think it's important. You've come this far, you've built this lead. Don't let it slip, because I think optically it would serve as a little bit of a letdown. And I forget Oiler fans piling on. They would if they come all the way back and they reel in the Canucks. So, if they need some things to play for, to me it is just maintain that gap. Try to run the Oilers out of real estate, essentially. With 14 games to go, they've got those games in hand. But, if the Canucks can go 9-5 over their final 14 games, that's probably, the Oilers at that point almost have to run the table. And the Oilers have some tough games left, 2 against Colorado, and they still have to go into Toronto and Winnipeg, among others. And then they've got the head-to-head with the Canucks as well. So those are sorts of things that I'm looking for. But I would also say in isolation, I don't want to make more of this than it is. But look, they've won 1 of the first 3 games on the homestand. We all fell into this trap of come off the road, playing well, 9 at home. This is where they're going to put the hammer down. And they've won 1 of the first 3, and they've had some letdowns in 2 of the 3. Get it right tonight. You got a Buffalo team that's coming off last night in Seattle. They played on Saturday, so this is 3-4 for them. You're talking about the goaltending. If they don't see UPL, that's a massive win for the Canucks. Devin Levi, if he gets to start, he hasn't played an NHL game since January 24th. Test him. Put pucks on net. Make the goalie make some freaking saves instead of missing the target the way they did the other night. And I don't think that they've been guilty of that a lot this season, but boy, Rick Tocchet sort of held that up. I was surprised he didn't have the stat sheet at the podium on Saturday right after the game. But he was quick to point out the number of block shots, but just the number that missed the target as well. JT Miller had a couple of looks and missed the net by a mile. So here's a goalie that hasn't faced NHL shooters. He's played well in the AHL, but that's the American League. Test him. If they see Devin Levi, put pucks on net. Look, they've got off to great starts in all 3 games on the homestand. They've opened the scoring in the first 2 minutes of all 3 games. So it hasn't been their starts. It's been those lulls later in games. And so I just want to see them pounce on a Buffalo team that's a long way from home, has a lot to play for, and is playing reasonably well. But I still think that the Canucks sort of have to get this one right, because if there's a lot of noise in the market after 2 losses, imagine the storylines if they come out of the wrong end of the scoreline in this one tonight.
Against the Sabres of all teams. Jeff, our next segment here, we're going to give our kind of best lineups with and without Dakota Joshua. I'm not going to make you give yours, but where do you stand on the Lotto line? Could the Lotto line be reunited? Should they be reunited? Where do you stand on the Lotto line at this stage?
I think I'd keep that ticket in my back pocket for when they're down or even tied in games, and you need some juice, as Tocchet likes to say. I do think that there's enough there. And again, they don't have Dakota Joshua right now, but when they get Joshua back, I still think that this can be a 3-line team. But I think you saw in January when you had those 3 guys playing together that they found something, and it would certainly give Elias Pettersson, the best set of line mates that he's had all season. And the results were there for them when they went through Jersey and New York and into Pittsburgh on that 7-game road trip. So, it's not something that they have to start with. Again, I go back to playoffs and matchups. If you're loading up, I think the other team can counter, with a checking line and see if they can't neutralize. And so I think that's why Rick Tocchet's best interest probably to try to spread his offense around a little bit. But boy, there are situations in games, just like putting, Hronek and Hughes out there with really juice it, and why wouldn't you? So I think it's situational for me, and we've seen it from time to time, and it hasn't necessarily worked here of late. But just because it hasn't worked of late, I still go back to the larger sample in January and know that those 3 guys can come through for you. And at some point down the stretch and into the playoffs, they quite likely will have to come through for the Vancouver Canucks to have success.
Jeff, good stuff. I asked you before. We know exactly who it is tonight. It's Irfan Gaffar, co-hosting Rink Wide Vancouver with you. It's going to be a good time. Jeff, thanks so much for doing this.
All right, guys. It's always fun being on with you. I'm looking forward to the game tonight.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.